Why is Meta spending these insane amounts of money? When I first heard that news, I thought Sam, wasn't telling the truth. I thought that Sam was just exaggerating and, messing with Zuck. What Meta did in this case, which is, in my opinion, brilliant, and in my opinion, landscape changing, is, I've been recruiting for long enough to see, recruiting innovation come and go. This is really innovative. This is really unique. It is throwing the market for a total loop. It's considered crazy, but from the Meta perspective, it actually makes a ton of sense. It's bold, it's provocative, and it's actually pretty freaking awesome, to be honest with you, because I don't think these people did it for just the money. I think these people did it for both the money and... Welcome to the First 10 podcast. In this episode, we're going to be talking all about Meta superintelligence recruiting strategy. There's been so much in the news about how Meta has been hiring all this AI talent from the top labs, OpenAI, Anthropic, DeepMind, etc. We're seeing things in the news about $100 million salaries, $100 million sign-on bonuses. We just saw something in the news about $1 billion. I mean, these numbers are just getting outrageous, regardless of what's true and what's not true or what is happening. Meta is a major player. Meta is making a major move, and their recruiting strategy, their hiring strategy specifically, is what's making waves. And that's what I wanted to emphasize in this episode. First 10 being all about hiring for startups. I am a connoisseur of sorts of great recruiting, and great recruiting is exactly what I see happening here on the Meta front. So on this episode, I want to cover 4 specific aspects of what I'm seeing of what's happening here. 1, why is Meta spending these insane amounts of money? What's happening here that's causing them to do that? Number 2, what is this strategy that Meta is employing to hire all these people? What makes this hiring spree by Meta not your typical hiring spree? And then most importantly, what are the implications for you in the startup ecosystem, whether you're an engineer, whether you're a founder, whether you're an investor? What are the implications of what Meta is doing here? So why is Meta dropping billions? So everyone knows that Meta developed an LLM AI model called Llama. Meta was super huge with this model being their, big contribution to AI. It was open source. It was counter to what OpenAI and Anthropic were doing on the closed source side. And many people, many startups talked about using Llama and integrating Llama into its day-to-day. And it seemed like, that's what Meta was, intending to do in their contribution to the AI world. Recently, there were whispers or murmurs of Zuck or Meta not being as happy as one would like with regards to their AI strategy. It could be they weren't happy with Llama. It could be that they weren't happy with the open source direction. It could be that other labs were doing so much more and they had a refresh in vision. Unclear exactly what was happening there, but something compelled them to want to make a change. Now, kind of popping out for a second, Meta does have history with making pivots. I do remember specifically back in the day when Meta was, at that time it was Facebook. Facebook was web first experience. Then everyone started getting super hot with mobile. Snap came out, Instagram came out sometime around that time with the whole mobile wave. Zuck wasn't happy with Meta's pivot or speed of execution towards mobile. So I specifically remember him implementing or putting in place something that they called a lockdown. A lockdown was when he, required everyone in the company to zone in on mobile first, put everything else to the side, and deliver on their vision to become a mobile first company. They did that, and they actually executed quite incredibly. And then now we primarily think of Meta, Facebook and their suite of apps as a mobile first suite of apps. They then did that with the metaverse. So y'all remember the crypto craze, the NFT craze, the metaverse craze. Zuck was all in on that. He went so far in that he changed the name of the company to Meta, we're all kind of used to Meta. Reminder, Meta is short for the metaverse. It's unclear to what degree there will be a metaverse. We're building towards a metaverse. It was just a blip in, technology history. Unclear what happened there. If it did turn out that it was just a blip in history, then wow, changing the name of your company for that is on the, aggressive side. If it turns out that we are still on our way to that, then, great job, Zuck, in hindsight, making that change. We will see what AI turns out to be when we look back on this in hindsight. If AI does, change the world, and it, does turn out to be the, largest, technological wave in the history of technological waves, then, this spending spree, which we're about to talk about on AI talent, will have in hindsight been a fantastic idea and a, small price to pay for, what might be, AI dominance. So now that Zuck has decided to go all in on AI, let's talk through what has happened. So knowing that Zuck and Meta like to acquire companies and have a history of successfully acquiring companies to pursue unique strategies, they famously acquired Instagram for what at that time felt like, an expensive amount of money. They bought Instagram for $1 billion. There are, historic emails floating around between Zuck and Sheryl that talk about, yeah, that's a lot of money. And it turned out in hindsight that $1 billion wasn't a lot of money. They famously acquired WhatsApp for $20 billion. WhatsApp just had a 50-person team at that time. So on a per engineer basis, that was ridiculous amounts of money. It turned out in hindsight that that wasn't a lot of money given the product success of WhatsApp. They bought Oculus. Oculus turned into the Reality Lab strategy. And, there's a whole, huge business that they're building around wearables and what Oculus brought to the table there. So Meta is not new to acquisitions to pursue a strategy. So let's say that, acquisition was a strategy that Zuck decided to pursue. When you decide to pursue an acquisition strategy, then usually what happens is you go and survey the land of acquisition opportunities and you see who you could get for what price. So there aren't a great number of labs that can, deliver at the, size that Meta's ambitions look to be. And so they probably went out and knocked on the door of OpenAI. They probably went out and knocked on the door of Anthropic. It was rumored that Perplexity was courted and turned them down. Safe Superintelligence was courted and turned them down. Mira Murati's thinking machines turned them down. Zuck then ended up landing on Scale AI. Before he even landed on Scale AI, we did not know that that was what he was planning to do. All we knew at one point was that Sam Altman went on a podcast and said that Zuck is trying to unsuccessfully hire people from OpenAI and offering upwards of $100 million pay packages. That was all that we had heard, and the market went ballistic. So people were like, is this real? Is this not real? How could, Meta justify offering someone millions of dollars? How are single individuals all of a sudden making $100 million offers? The market just went, berserk on that news. When I first heard that news, I thought Sam, wasn't telling the truth. I thought that Sam was just exaggerating and, messing with Zuck, to be honest, because maybe, Meta was trying to poach its people. Maybe Meta was successful, maybe Meta wasn't successful, but, saying something like that to the market, can certainly, get a company like Meta to have to pay more. And so that is what I thought was happening. None of this has been confirmed, but for a lot of, speculation on X and articles written about. Let's hold that for just 1 second. So as soon as that $100 million rumor started coming out, here's what we started to hear. So Meta then acquired Scale AI. Scale AI was purchased for just shy of $15 billion. In exchange for that $15 billion, Meta was going to get half of whatever remained of Scale AI and a team of 30 or so super people from Scale AI, including Alex Wang, Scale's CEO, were going to come over and form the initial basis of Meta's Superintelligence Lab. So Meta, for $14 billion, bought a 30-person team to incept, to form their Superintelligence Lab. At this point, nobody knew what the Superintelligence Lab is or was. They just knew that, they just spent $14 billion on, 30 people to seed it. We then started to hear rumors about the $100 million offers. Very soon thereafter, what we heard is Meta announcing that some number of people would be joining the Superintelligence Lab. It was 12, 13, 15, some number of people like that. It was like 15 people. And what was amazing is that list of people was made up of some of the top AI talent and researchers in the space. I don't know the exact numbers in front of me, but there were like 4 researchers from OpenAI. And these weren't just researchers. These were, people who single-handedly designed some of OpenAI's main models. There were people there from Anthropic. There were people there from DeepMind. So Meta literally assembled a team of top researchers in the space single-handedly, and then attached them to what they bought of Scale AI, and then that together was intended to form the Superintelligence Lab, or at least what we now know to be the beginnings of the Superintelligence Lab, because they've certainly grown since then. So a lot of people at that time were talking about how this math is crazy. Those are super massive numbers. They weren't too, shocked by the $14 billion, $15 billion Scale AI offer, but they were super shocked by the $100 million sign-on bonuses, the $100 million, single packages. Now, from a recruiting perspective, those are massive numbers. You don't hear about, single people being hired for that amount. That's just unheard of. I mean, going rate for these people is, I don't know, let's call it $2 to $5 million a year, maybe like $10 million a year is considered crazy. That's $40 million over 4 years. So here we're talking about 100 million, potentially 200 million, who knows, whatever the number is, but multiples higher than what market is. And, clearly, sticker shocking to the market. When, however, looking at this from a acquisition perspective, the numbers become not as crazy. So here's what I think happened. What I think happened is Meta decided that they wanted to get into AI. They decided that it was worth it for them to spend a certain amount of money to get into AI. They had already justified spending that amount of money on a company acquisition. If they were going to buy, OpenAI was just did a new funding round valued at $300 billion. Anthropic just did a funding round valued at a little bit over $100 billion, $150 billion, I believe. So these companies are valued at ridiculous amounts of money. Let's say Meta was willing to pay somewhere in the neighborhood of that amount of money, which, is a decent amount for an acquisition, but it's not crazy when compared to Meta's, multi-trillion-dollar market cap. And if they believed that, acquiring or developing the capability to build AI was, going to have a, certain amount of impact on that market cap. I mean, if it doubled the market cap, that's worth trillions. If it, grew it by 50%, that's still worth over $1 trillion. So to justify spending $100 billion is really only 3%, 5%, I don't know, whatever the math is on their current market cap. It's not crazy to think that a technology as transformative as AI was going to have that extent of impact. So let's say that Meta justified spending $100 billion on acquiring a company to deliver on their AI strategy, when they realized that the best they could do in the market was Scale AI for $14 billion, that left them with 80 some odd billion dollars remaining and no companies left to buy. So what I think was Meta's brilliant moment is they decided to bring in this individual talent that they would have otherwise relied on it being a part of a company. They decided to go bring this individual talent, but not for recruiting dollars, but for acquisition dollars. That's what I think was brilliant. Usually, the way companies work is they'll have two different ways of looking at things, and those two different ways of looking at things usually don't talk. So recruiting usually gets, open roles to fill that are, fairly constrained by compensation and hiring leaders, and they have to kind of work within a, pretty defined box. And so usually when a company like Meta buys another company, like when they went out and bought Instagram came with, like 10 people, 15 people, not a lot of people. And then they went out and added hundreds of those to those people. So the first 15 people that came from Instagram got acquisition level proceeds. I don't know what the math was. Let's say they got, 10 billion, 50 million each. I don't know, whatever the number ended up being. And then every next person that they hired got, regular Meta comp. And that's common. That's the most common way for companies to do acquisitions and then build out the rest of the team thereafter. What Meta did in this case, which is, in my opinion, brilliant, and in my opinion, landscape changing, is they brought in individual people after their initial acquisition, but for the same acquisition level proceeds. So that's kind of insane. So if, let's say, Scale AI, they bought 30 people for $14 billion. I don't know, my math's going to be off, but let's say that's $500 million per person, or $250 million per person, whatever that number is. All Meta had to do was say, let's assume that we were able to get Scale AI level people, but another 50 of them. So let's just go out and find individuals that meet that hiring bar and then allocate that budget to those people. And so that's exactly what I'm pretty sure Meta did. Again, I have no insider knowledge. I don't know anyone at Meta that, enlisted this strategy, but I'm pretty sure that's what happened. And it was probably either a Zuck level idea or it was a corp dev level idea that Zuck went for. And what we're now seeing is literally them just doing it. So they just literally thought of this idea, said, yeah, that makes sense, that maths out, and now they're just doing it. And it is throwing the market for a total loop. It's considered crazy, but from the Meta perspective, it actually makes a ton of sense. It's bold, it's provocative, and it's actually pretty freaking awesome, to be honest with you, because I do think from the lens of Meta, this talent is worth it. It's obviously worth it. And, why should Meta care about how the market does things? That's just, status quo and, preconceived notions and, kind of boxing yourself in for no great reason. So, props to Meta and props to, the team that conceptualized and is delivering on this strategy. And it's just awesome to see. So I'm here for it. Now that we've talked about, what they're doing, I wanted to talk for a little bit about how I think they're doing it, because this has also been talked about and this has also been scrutinized. When news started to drop of the $100 million offers, a lot of people would say things, or were saying things like, oh, they're just buying the talent. They're just throwing money at these people. Sam Altman said, he threw shade at Zuck when he said that, oh, any company that would offer $100 million to any people is, bad for culture, and it's not a culture that anyone would want to be a part of. Now, that was an assumption by Sam that the only thing that Zuck was offering was the money. I'm fairly positive that not only did Zuck have a very clear, business strategy and business justification, but a very compelling vision for what he wanted these, top recruits to, do as part of joining the Superintelligence Lab. So I don't think these people were offered $100 million to just join a lab and then, TBD on that vision. I'm pretty confident that, Zuck directly conveyed a vision that these people found incredibly compelling, more compelling than the places where they currently work. And then that more compelling vision and strategy was supplemented with the $100 million offers. And then that then became the no-brainer that these people, decided to join Meta. So at the time that all this was happening, it was unclear what Zuck's vision is. He has since come out with a statement that clearly expressed his vision, or at least like the glimpses of his vision. And basically what that vision is super intelligence for every human in the world. And so when Zuck described it, he talked about super intelligence being AI, making AI better. And when you think about that and the implications of that, you could start to get a glimpse for what an exciting / kind of weird world can look like. But let's say that is the vision. So the vision of putting super intelligence into the hands of every single person in the world, that I think fits the category of compelling enough, right? I mean, Microsoft at one point wanted to put a computer into everyone's home. That was considered compelling enough. Certainly a massive vision. If we take the expedited growth of AI today via ChatGPT and OpenAI and Anthropic and all that stuff, and then you expand that vision to that going into the hands of every single person in the world, which Meta has pretty great distribution of, then that becomes I would at least put that into the category of compelling enough for a really smart person to want to work on. And then you supplement that again with the $100 million packages. And I don't think these people did it for just the money. I think these people did it for both the money and in pursuit of at least a vision that I think, again, fits into the category of quite compelling. Then there was the matter of how Meta went about doing this. So, OpenAI's head of recruiting went on X, and he was pretty upset about the losing of great talent, and he decided to convey that in the form of it's not fair that Meta enlisted such aggressive recruiting strategies to hire this talent. And what he was specifically referring to was the aggressive timeline. I don't have the exact tweet in front of me, but it was something like, how could Meta be so unfair as to require these people to make decisions in 24 hours or overnight or whatever it was that he said. So my thought on that is, if Meta has enlisted this, super unique, let's call it a once in a lifetime hiring strategy where they're willing to offer $100 million plus, then I think they're equally allowed to ask for any timeline they want. I think they could ask for a decision in 48 hours. I think they ask for a decision in 24 hours. I think they could ask for a decision right there on the call if they want. It's their offer to make, and it's their conditions to enlist. And look, if the market didn't think that was fair, then no one would have accepted the offer. And if these people, did actually feel like they were pressured or somehow, coerced into making the decision to accept a $100 million salary, I'm positive that OpenAI countered in some way, or Anthropic countered in some way. And I'm sure that these people also, after having accepted the offer, if they did have a day or two or whatever, a week to think about it, if they really did regret it, I'm sure their former employers would welcome them back. And I don't think we've seen any of that yet. So I don't think that what Meta did was overly aggressive. I also think that I do think that it is insulting to these people's intelligence to think that they needed more time to make what, in my mind, was actually a pretty easy decision. If Zuck calls you on the phone and he conveys a vision and he supplements that vision with a once in a lifetime $100 million or whatever the number is pay package, if these people are smart enough to design the world's best LLMs and the world's most important technology, if these people are smart enough to do that, then I think these people are similarly smart enough to make an employment decision, to decide for themselves, as the adults that they are, whether or not they want to go build super intelligence for everyone and whether or not they want to be $100 million richer or not. I don't think there's such thing as being coerced or pressured to make a decision like that. I think that these people were able to think that through pretty quickly. I mean, how long does it take to call a significant other or to, stare up at the sky and, make a decision like that? I mean, do you want to be $100 million richer or do you not? Do you want to be a part of this vision or do you not? Most people make decisions. I'm a believer that most people make decisions in the form of blink decisions. So there's a Malcolm Gladwell book on that concept if you want to read up about it. But most people make blink decisions. They know exactly what they want to do, and then they go spend all this time to either validate it or to overturn it. And so again, I think whatever it is that Meta offered was more than reasonable from a timeline perspective. And I also want to mention that because we're not operating from the lens of recruiting, again, that feedback was from a recruiting leader who was, providing a perspective from the lens of what's common for recruiting. These guys were operating, Meta was operating from the lens of mergers and acquisitions. And in mergers and acquisitions, when a company is buying another company, a lot of homework is done on who is who and who's being sought after. So they're talking to the best people in the space for jobs that are, the top jobs in the space. And they know exactly what these people are making and they know exactly what they want to be offering. And when they offer something, they know what's good and what's not good. And they know that what they offered was, again, what I interpret as, once in a lifetime type of compensation. And when offered those sorts of, opportunities, M&A often does and is, very free to require whatever terms it is that they, want. And if the person or the company being bought doesn't want to do that, then they're free to say no. And then, the acquirer can, adjust their own timeline, or they could move on to, whoever is likely the, next respective target. So that's what I think happened. It's August 4th today. August 4th is now several weeks, maybe even a month since we started to see glimpses of this strategy. We've now seen Scale AI acquisition. We've now seen the initial, 15 or so single acquirers that are joining the Superintelligence Lab. And now every day or every few days, we see another, one to few people added to that set. We've seen several people come from Apple, which is, interesting because, Meta's basically, gutting Apple's, whatever exists of Apple's AI strategy. Meta is gutting. The most recent rumors that we've heard is that Meta unsuccessfully went after everyone at Mira Murati's thinking machines. And the most recent headline is that a single person whose profile is being shared around has turned down a $1 billion offer. I don't know how true these numbers are. Maybe they're true, maybe they're not true. But let's say that these numbers are within the ballpark of what's true. Even if Meta did offer this one person a $1 billion package, that's a lot for any person. When compared to $100 billion budget and $15 billion scale acquisition and $85 billion in remaining budget, and some otherwise incredible people being picked up for $100 million, if you've already spent 65, and your question is, should I spend 66? Should I spend another B or not? It's not crazy from that perspective. And so I don't know. I personally think that, all's fair in love and recruiting. I love what Meta is doing. I love how they've, conceptualized what to do and are just doing it. And the market is, just bearing witness to this. And I think it's freaking awesome. I think we are going to see this continue. I don't know how far into this AI strategy of Meta's we are. Maybe we're in the middle. Maybe we're towards the end. Maybe we're just in the beginning, and maybe they've justified $500 billion of spend towards this. I don't know. It's unclear. It's just really exciting to be bearing witness to this. I've been recruiting for long enough to see, recruiting innovation come and go. I spent a little bit of time, working closely with the corporate development group on acquisitions. I've worked with a lot of startups. I've seen a lot of startups get acquired and make their way through the ecosystem. This is really innovative. This is really unique. I do hope that the industry decides to take notice. I do think that recruiting within the confines of how companies see recruiting is a very boxed in industry. I see it boxed in, governed by a considerable amount of status quo. That status quo is, perpetuated by, venture capitalists, by, people in compensation, in human resources, by companies, by founders themselves, by recruiting leaders themselves. There's just a lot of, here's how the industry has done it, and here's therefore how the industry should continue to do it. And, many recruiters are kind of subject to that. We're on the kind of order taking side of that ecosystem. Mergers and acquisitions has its own version of status quo, but it is, considerably expanded from how it is thought about versus recruiting, though it's very interesting to me that both roads often are justified and lead to the acquisition of talent, yet both of those functions within companies don't often talk. And I just think it's really awesome that those two functions in this case were talking, and Meta is showing the world, what, is possible, and then what the results of that can look like. I do believe that we'll see quite a meaningful trickle effect. On the one hand, it is possible that the market agrees that this is an anomaly and it will not impact the way founders think about compensating top talent, the way other companies of Meta size and maybe even, smaller think about compensating their talent, the way they think about acquiring companies is possible. Again, that what Meta is doing will be seen as an anomaly and it will not impact these different players in the space. What I think, though, is that the industry is taking notice. This is considered, global news from an impact perspective. Every single company CEO is taking notice. Every single company corp dev group, every single engineer is taking notice, and this will, trickle down. So every engineer who was offered something by Meta and didn't, move forward, they're on the receiving end of, improved compensation from their current employers. Every single person that works in a function where talent was directly recruited for Meta, my take is that their compensation has been, reset, recalibrated, and improved. Sam Altman came out with a quote, just 1 week or 2 weeks after this hiring spree was announced, where they said, we're going to take another look at our compensation strategy. That's, code for, we have to, hurry the heck up and improve compensation for everybody that this is affecting. So everyone at OpenAI, no doubt, got a raise, or at least the people in this department. Same with Anthropic, same with, Microsoft and Google, et cetera. The people who were in consideration for roles, open roles, both at Meta and at these other competing organizations, now had market data to justify a renegotiation. Now, whether that means, doubling or tripling a package or even an incremental improvement, no doubt those compensation packages did not stay the same. Now, trickle that down. At First 10, we primarily work with earlier startups. The startups that we work with are anywhere from seed funded, few $1 million in seed funding, all the way up to our biggest startup received a $250 million round of funding. Our market compensates, let's call it 150 base on the low end to, let's say, call it 350 base on the high end, somewhere along that range, most falling in the middle, plus equity. I'm pretty sure that we're going to see base compensation inch up within our ecosystem, and we'll also likely see equity compensation inch up as well. Now that we, have direct market data point that says what AI talent is worth, at least at that meta level, someone will figure out the math on what that makes that talent worth at this early startup level. Again, I just see this as precedent setting. I do think that when we look back on this, we could even consider this to be the the meta AI hiring effect or the meta superintelligence hiring effect. Now, what Meta did with Scale AI in terms of saying they bought the company, but really just handpicking 30 people to come join the team, we've started to see a trend of that happening with Google buying Character AI, and now recently Google buying Windsurf, and then Windsurf kind of spinning out and getting acquired by another AI coding startup. That's an interesting happening in and of itself that I think is worth actually a whole separate episode, which has its own set of implications for the market. The optimistic view is that their hiring strategy of part acquisition, part acquiring some of the top talent to form this super lab will result in super intelligence for everyone in the world, providing every single person in the world with access to the power of AI in the way that AI will be conveyed at the time that super intelligence is available seems super powerful and super compelling. Again, when I think about the concept of a computer for everyone, and if we could provide super AI for everyone and make everyone that much more productive, or on the receiving ends of the benefits of AI, that's certainly positive and valuable for the consumer, and will be valuable for Meta from a growth perspective. And I'm positive that that's a big part of the reason that the people who joined have decided to join, of course, in addition to the life-changing dollars. On the pessimistic side, there are many critiques of Meta, big ones around the negative impact of social on society. I've heard people talk about how social will in the future be looked at the same way as smoking is looked at today, looked down upon, and at one point we'll realize the negative health implications of what social is doing to society, what social is doing to our brains, what social is doing to our children. And Meta again is the poster child of that. So think about all the negative that Instagram has created in our society, and then just think about putting AI behind that. So that would certainly be a negative. Think about the negative impact that Meta has been accused of with regards to election interference. Think about what AI can do to that, to fraudulent videos, to fraudulent posts. So that would be on the more pessimistic side. I think we're early. I think the reality will probably be somewhere in between. Regardless of how this plays out, I'm not as big of a commentator on that. What I am more of a commentator on is the strategy that was enlisted to bring in this top talent, just being in the world of recruiting. That's what's of particular interest to me, and massive props to Meta. And I'm just super excited by what this has possibly broken open with regards to how the industry looks at the acquiring of talent and the steps that that are willing to be taken to bring in that top talent. So you heard it here first, Boris, in the First 10 podcast. Very excited to be sharing this with everyone. I have no doubt that this will that people will have feedback and questions and want to discuss. So please share, and I'm very excited to continue in the discussion.